The United States has over $1.6 trillion in student debt. Of that, almost half of it is held by young adults between the ages of 18 and 27. I'm Bradford with the Penny Pincher's Guide, and unfortunately, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions regarding what college is and what it is not. And all of that helps feed into the ever-growing amount of student debt. Now, by the end of this video, I'm gonna help dispel some of those myths and give you actionable steps that you can take so you don't become a statistic of the student debt crisis. Now, before I dive into the subject of student loans and their associated debt, I do want you to know this is a part of our larger video series to accompany our book, A Penny Pincher's Guide to College. Now, if you're unsure whether or not college is right for you, I highly suggest you go back to our first video where we discuss the subject of making that decision. And you can get to it from the card that I'm dropping right here. Now, diving into the subject of student loans and their associated debt. The very first myth that I want to dispel is the idea of student loan forgiveness. Now, especially as election season is ramping up, we have the presidential and all the different congressional elections. You've probably heard some politicians promise that they're going to forgive X amount of student loans if they're elected into office. Now, whether or not they actually follow through on these promises is something else entirely. And I highly recommend you do not live your life and make plans that your student loans are going to be forgiven by the government at any point in time. Case in point, you might have heard of the program where if you work in the public sector for 10 years, you're going to be eligible to have all of your student loans forgiven. Now, it sounds like a great idea, especially for those that are teachers and those that have relatively low paying jobs but still require a college degree. Between 2018 and 2019, over 10,000 applicants applied who had worked 10 plus years in the public sector. Of all those that applied, less than 1% actually had their loans forgiven. So while student loan forgiveness programs might become a thing in the future, they are certainly not one that you should rely on right now. Now, the second myth I want to tackle is the idea that your education is an investment regardless of the cost. Now, I definitely agree that education is important, and investing in yourself through education is one of the best things that you can do while you're young. But the general idea that no matter how much you pay for your education will somehow benefit you in the long run is absolutely wrong. And we're seeing millions of Americans experiencing this right now. Now, to truly think of education as an investment, you need to treat it as such. You need to think how much capital I'm putting in terms of what kind of return on investment or ROI I'm going to get out of it. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't view it like this, and they're willing to spend whatever they want, and banks are willing to lend however much money, whether tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, in student loans because it's backed by the government. Now, the cost of college and federally backed student loans is an entirely different can of worms, and I'm going to stay away from that. I want to focus on the things that can impact you and that you directly have control over. Now, it's my belief that you need to stay away from student loans entirely, and that if you're not able to start school until a couple years later after high school, so you've had the opportunity to work a job and save up money so that way you can actually pay the tuition, I think that is a much better option. But if you are going to consider student loans in any application, you do need to truly consider it as an investment. What kind of degree are you getting? What kind of jobs is that degree going to open up for you? And what kind of money can you expect to make year one after graduation? Your investment should be a much smaller number than however much money you're able to make after graduation. Now, this brings me to a related subject with the idea of your education as an investment. Please do not get a useless degree. Now, if you have all the money in the world and you want to go get an education just for the love of learning, all the power to you, and I think that's awesome. But if you're trying to use your education as a stepping stone to fulfill your goals later on in life, it needs to have a purpose. Now, I know certain degree fields can be pretty polarizing as to whether or not they can help you, but I think we can all come together and agree that there are some degrees that the only purpose of getting them is so that way you can go and become a professor in that field. So if you get X degree, the only way you're gonna ever get a job that employs you for actually having that degree is if then you go get your doctorate and you come back and teach at a university. Now, if that's something you really wanna do, good. But in terms of taking loans out, that is a horrible investment, and you're committing financial suicide to do that. To illustrate the example that your education needs to an investment, I'd like to talk to you about a friend of mine. And this friend went to school, racked up about $100,000 to be able to get their teaching degree. And after about a year in teaching, they decided, hey, I really don't like this. I think I want to go back to school and get my master's and then my doctorate in publishing. Now, being a teacher or being a publisher, perfectly good career fields and can serve great purposes within society. But looked at the cost of what it would cost for her to actually go back and get that master's and doctorate in publishing. It'd be another $150,000 in debt. All said and done, it'd be over $250,000 in student loans to be able to go get a job that on the high end offers $77,000 a year on average. Now, that is a really good salary, but in terms of an investment where you're spending $250,000 to be able to make $77,000 after you have experience in the field, that is a dumb decision. So the bottom line of this myth is when you get an education, treat it as an investment. Treat it as if you're investing in the stock market or buying real estate. The capital that you put in to yourself in this instance needs to make you returns in the long run that vastly exceed what you initially invested. On to the third myth that I want to address, and that deals with what type of school that you actually attend. Now, in terms of the school that you attend, there's really 4 options. You can go to a community college, you can go to an in-state public college, an out-of-state public college, or you can go to a private college. And with those 4 types of schools, there's also varying stereotypes that are associated with them. Some of them are earned, but others are certainly not. The first type of school that I want to talk about is that of the community college. Unfortunately, community colleges get a lot of bad stigma that the only reason you go to a community college is if you're not smart enough to get into a 4-year university. And I'd argue this cannot be further from the case. There are a lot of really good reasons to go to a community college, and they're very few and far between that are more so due to different geographic areas, reasons that you should not go to a community college. Now I'll add the stipulation. If you get a full ride, go to a 4-year university right off the bat, all the power to you. But if you don't have a full ride, these are some of the benefits that you can expect to see if you go to community college. Now, you're going to be able to knock out all of your core classes, or at least most of them, that would be the same types of class that you would need to complete at any other 4-year university, regardless of the degree. Benefit, you're likely paying less than half of what you would pay at a state school or a private school. Next thing, for those base classes, you're probably going to be experiencing a giant lecture hall with 300 or 400 other students if you're at a 4-year university. Community college, you're likely going to be having class sizes that are a lot closer to what you experienced in high school with 20 to 30 students each. Now, in terms of you actually being able to reach out and get help from a professor, you're actually going to be able to do that in a community college. Whereas at a 4-year university, you're going to be lucky if you get time to speak with one of the teacher's assistants, and actually getting one-on-one help from the professor isn't going to be something that you ever have. And then the last thing that I want to talk about with community colleges is, depending on where you are, at least for my home state of Virginia, they had a program where if you go to community college, do well, get your associate's degree, then you have guaranteed acceptance to any public university in the state. Now that means you could go to UVA, which is one of the top ranked schools in the entire nation, but it's also a public school. So you do the community college, go to the 4-year university at UVA, and when you graduate, no one knows that there's any difference in your degree between somebody that started off and did all 4 years there versus you who were a transfer student. Now the next type of schools are going to be public universities. Now in this instance, I'm just going to lump out-of-state and in-state schools together. And I'd like to say that there is absolutely no reason for you to go to an out-of-state school, pay twice as much in tuition, unless there are very, very specific degree fields that are not offered inside your own state. So with those exceptions aside, never go to an out-of-state university. You're going to be paying a lot more for the same product, and it's just not worth the cost. And really, there isn't a whole lot for me to talk about when it comes to public schools. I think they're a much smarter option than moving into the last part, which is private schools. Now, with few exceptions, which they do exist for certain degree fields, maybe if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer, there are certain private schools that are more beneficial. But this all goes back to the idea that you need to treat your education as an investment. Is it worth it to spend $80,000 a year at a private school to get a slightly better paying job than if you were able to pay $20,000 or $30,000 a year with a public in-state school and get maybe a slightly less paying job? I think if you run the numbers in terms of the capital that's invested and the money that you're going to make after you graduate, you'll find in almost every single instance it makes more sense to go to a public in-state school than it does to go to a private school. Now that covers the 3 myths that I wanted to dispel when it comes to the subject of student loans. 1, don't bank on your student loans being forgiven. 2, treat your education as an investment. And 3, unless you have a full ride, do 2 years at a community college and then transfer into a 4-year in-state public university. Now, if you do only those 3 things, I can promise you that even if you have to take out student loans for whatever reason, you're going to graduate with much less debt than any of your peers that violate those 3 rules. Now, I really hope this gave you some valuable content, and I want to thank you for your time today. And as always, just remember to pinch a little. Thanks for watching. And if you liked this video, make sure to check out the video that's on the left-hand side of your screen.
Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like more great content, and to support our channel.